Welcome to Eternal Paradigm. Together we're uncovering the human experience and exploring physical, mental, emotional and spiritual stories with me, your host, Amy Ravel. Welcome to Eternal Paradigm. I hope you're enjoying your journey to find you. This episode has been revelatory for me in some aspects, because with my guest Prachi S Vaish, who is a clinical psychologist, psychotherapist and a certified clinical trauma specialist, I've been able to do some digging in my own personal journey, but also to really understand, I guess you could say, combine the kind of spirituality with science and clinical practice. So I have, again, because of the crazy situation that we're all in, I haven't actually met Prachi face to face. However, we have had the most amazing conversation and I'm really pleased to be able to bring it to you. In this conversation, I asked Prachi a whole range of different questions, and she has been absolutely amazing in being open in her learning, open about her own personal journey and her experiences. It was lovely to be able to hear the sounds of India while we were talking.
Hi Urmi, it's lovely to be here today at Eternal Paradigm, and my name is Prachi S Vaish, and I am a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist. I'm also a certified clinical trauma specialist, and today I'm speaking to you from India. I have been working in the field of mental health for the last 15 years. I was in fact the first one to start online psychotherapy in India back in 2009. And my areas of specialization include relationships, intimacy issues. I also work in a very special niche area where I help couples who want to experiment with open relationships. I help them transition, and I also work with anxiety disorders, and I help with recovery of trauma of emotional abuse.
What was it that kind of led you to looking at or working in the field of intimacy?
That's a very good question, actually. I have always, since I started getting into the field of mental health, I realized that there was a knack I had for helping people, couples, create this bridge of communication with each other. And I started grooming myself more in that area. But specifically when it comes to open relationships and intimacy issues, you're absolutely right. The way it is looked at in India is very, very different as compared to what it is looked at in the West. We are still extremely conservative in our approach to it. But I realized that, there's this whole section of society who is also coming of age as far as this aspect of relationship is concerned, and they are experimenting full on. So we have I got a chance to associate with this wonderful community here called the Kinky Collective, who are essentially an awareness building community for kinks, particularly related to the BDSM aspect. And they do some amazing work in terms of spreading awareness and information. And I also met a lot of people who were stepping out of the traditional marriage bounds and trying to experiment. And as I interacted with these people, I realized that while a lot of people had the zeal to experiment, they did not have the right tools to do it right. So it ended up creating a lot of misunderstanding because for an open relationship, which is a mutual one, you have to start out with a very, very solid foundation. And I realized that people were just, because it looked so fascinating and it looked like a hall pass to do whatever you want to, they just jumped into it most of the time and thinking that it's going to make their relationship better, but it ended up making it worse. And I realized that, this is somewhere I could help. I could use my training as a psychologist and I could help them to understand what it really means to establish a solid foundation before you venture out, and what it means to do it as a team rather than, get it riddled with jealousy and insecurity and suspicion, and how to make it a really fun experimentative journey. So yeah, that's how I managed to get into it. And once I got into it, although it is still very hush hush, I do have people who come to me for this, and I thoroughly enjoy this work. I've in fact done it for people out of India as well, a couple of.
It's your personal journey and understanding how to make sense of it being instrumental in your work that you've been doing with clients abroad and locally.
Are you asking me this as, as my entire realm of work, or are you asking this?
No, just specific. This is just specific to this side when it comes to relationships and intimacy.
Okay.
And then I have lots more questions for you. Don't worry.
Yeah, so yeah, my personal angle actually brought in a lot of input for me, because I was able to live firsthand what I wanted. So initially I just acted as an observer, because for me also it was a new experience, and I acted as an observer. And I wasn't even thinking of this as a potential client base. It's only when I started. So I am somebody who, I love stories. I love people's stories. I can listen to people talk about their lives the whole time. So what started happening was that what started out as a very light and unattached kind of a thing turned into me ending up making a lot of friends in that community. And a lot of people would just start talking about, themselves and their relationships, and it would just be any conversation that you would have over drinks with anyone. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. And it also gave me a chance to explore a lot of aspects of my own relationship. But then I also realized that because I have the training and I have the knack to do this professionally, I was able to just extract the experience bit that I needed and bring it into my practice, into this aspect.
Can you just tell us a little bit more about, you mentioned was it the online psychotherapy? Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. Online in 2009.
Right.
You're one of the first people to launch this.
Correct.
What was that like? It's still happening here and around the world, and especially now, online is so big. How did you come to that? What happened? What took you to that point?
Yeah, that's a story I love to tell. So my husband, he is a part of the defense forces. And when I got married to him, so what happens is, I'm sure we get posted to all kinds of godforsaken places. So initially, when we would, I quit my job to move with him. And after a while, my son was born in 2008. And I started feeling a little pinch somewhere that, I have all this education and I'm not able to put it to use, because, well, we would get posted to really small places and there were no hospitals where I could work at. It didn't make sense to set up a private practice. And I also realized that my peers there in the defense forces, in our bases, as well as the people of the cities in the towns where we would get posted at, there was a serious requirement for mental health professionals. And they didn't have any, because anyone who completes a good education usually wants to go to a bigger city and settle down and find work there. So one day, my husband and I, we were having a discussion, and I said, how can I turn this around? And he was quite a self-taught tech geek. So he said, why don't we use the internet and see if we can do something with that? And I said, okay, let's figure it out, because I really had this urge to do something, in terms of problem solving. And so we set up an initial, like an agony aunt kind of a website where, you could ask me questions and I could give you some advice. And we just did it as a trial. We thought, let's see how the response is. And within a week, we had tremendous response. We had, people writing into us from everywhere in the country. And that gave us an idea that, this has potential. We can do something about this. So then we set up a website properly. That time it was called Hope Network. I've recently revamped it this year and call it the Emotional Wellness Initiatives, because we've gone a little bigger. So we set up Hope Network, and I asked a lot of my colleagues at that point of time, some people who I gelled well with, to kind of, if they wanted to partner with me on this. And I got major skeptical responses there that, are you crazy? How the hell are you going to do psychotherapy online? And, how are you going to be able to swing it? And it's not going to work. And I was like, I just want to give it a shot. So I started out solo. Nobody was ready to partner up. And we just set up a basic website and started telling people that, this is, so I am a psychologist and, you could come and get help. And I started doing it over text chats and over phone calls. And then something amazing happened, which I was absolutely not expecting. What happened was therapists from across the world started reaching out to me saying that this is something they haven't seen before and they would love to be a part of it if they can in any way. So I said, yeah, why not? That's not something I thought would happen. So I am still friends with these people. So I had someone coming in from Liverpool, I had someone coming in from the Netherlands, someone coming in from Australia and other places, and Jerusalem, even for that matter. And they joined hands with me and they kind of, I put their profiles up on the website. And a couple of them at that point of time even did free sessions for people from India just to demonstrate that therapy works, it helps. And that's how it took off. And I said, okay, I mean, if it's getting this kind of a response, this certainly has potential. And then we just started off in a very streamlined way and we kept growing year by year. We obviously kept learning as we went every year that this works, this doesn't work. And we just on 19th of this month, I completed 11 years of doing this exclusively through a digital platform. So when the pandemic hit this year and everybody suddenly realized they had to transition to the online mode, I was already here long ago. So it turned out well.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Which takes me on to my next question, okay, which is you've kind of touched on how there are different areas that you're working in, not only in India, but internationally, and that your network, your community of experts is global as well. But on the ground, what is the psychology and psychiatric landscape like in India at the moment? Because it's emerging, it's changing. It has such a young population. And, I'm speaking as a second generation British Indian, where my family came over from India in the 70s. So my upbringing in the UK is of an Indian from the 70s. So whereas for you to be in this incredibly young and dynamic and energetic country where politically things are so different and changing, the population is changing, intergenerational challenges, cultural dynamics, and the East-West kind of debates, these are things that I've grown up with every day. I've been immersed in it from birth. And now this is something that is kind of, happening in India more frequently, and every day it's progressing, it's changing. And I'm interested specifically from the psychology and psychiatric, and later on we'll come on to the spiritual side of things. But because for us here, challenges around trauma, mental health issues, the social pressures and issues have been constant, intergenerational conflicts, marrying outside, and all these things that have been here always. Yet this is now something that is going to have to be dealt with by experts like yourself.
Yeah.
What's that like?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The landscape has really started to come of age when it comes to how we look at mental health. And this year certainly has been an eye-opener for a lot of people. People are starting to recognize that mental health is a real concept. Because like you said, for the generations before this, it was just like I have a client whose father still tells her that there's nothing known as mental health. What are you talking about? So, yeah, I mean,
I know that too well. Yes, very well indeed.
Right. I mean, they tell her that you guys have too much time these days to think about these things. That's why you come up with these concepts.
Yeah, it's funny because the irony is we're incredibly time poor. It's the other way, right?
Exactly. So while we have people coexisting who are of this thought process, we also have the younger generation who is so open-minded towards it. And I also realized that it has happened because a lot of celebrities have come forward and talked about mental health. And while I know that real stories count and they actually should make more impact, but well, the fact is that when some celebrity stands up and talks about it, people pay attention. So maybe even if that wasn't a really a very role model kind of a thing, but it did serve to push things forward. And initially, I think it started out as that's my personal opinion, that it started out as a very in thing to talk about, and now I think it has become slowly in the age groups of, I would say, let's say 18 to 40, and that's the age group for my major clientele as well. People are really becoming aware and conscious of what they want from life, and they are also becoming aware of the fact that they can always become better versions of who they are right now, and therapy is a wonderful tool to do that. So slowly we are moving, and that's my goal in my line of work, that to move from the illness model to the wellness model. You don't look at therapy or mental health services as just treatment oriented to fix a problem, but also to look at it as a vehicle for change, a tool for growth. And because learning never stops, there's always scope for something better. And therapy is a wonderful way of gaining more understanding into yourself, putting more and more trauma to rest, more and more healing to happen, and thus, leading a more balanced, conscious life.
We're moving on to looking at the spiritual dimension, combining it with your scientific learning. So what has your experience been of bringing the spiritual dimension with your scientific learning, combining it, and how do you apply your spiritual practice, if you have spiritual practices, in your professional practice? And now, if I explain a little bit, the reason I ask this question is because to me, tending to my mental well-being is a significant spiritual practice. And to me, it is on par with praying, meditation, and fulfilling that side of my being. And so that's where my question to you comes from, really.
Yeah, no, I understand. And yeah, I'm really glad you're asking me this, because usually people think that, something that is based or rooted in science cannot necessarily go hand in hand with something that's spiritual. But here in the field of mental health, we are talking about all dimensions. We are talking about the physical health, we are talking about the psychological health, emotional health. Then there is no sense in leaving spirituality behind, is there? My first, how should I say, encounter maybe, or my first
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go for it.
my first realization, let's say, that spirituality could be a very powerful medium for me to practice what I practice sometimes with some clients, happened when I was doing my licensing training in I think 2012. I had this, so we were attached to this government hospital in Gujarat, and so you know how the clientele is for a government hospital. People from usually the very, very simple walks of life come in, and they essentially are not very oriented to psychotherapy as a model. So I had this man come in, and he had been under treatment for obsessive compulsive disorder for quite some time medically, and he was on medication, and he had not received much relief through it, but he was still persisting because he wanted to get better. And when I started talking to him, so he was referred to me as a trainee. I mean, I was the trainee and I was supposed to take up his case, and I said, okay, let me not, and that's my process. I usually do not look at the previous files initially. I listen to the story from the client first, and then if I feel like I need to go back, and then I go back and look at the old records. So I said, okay, I'm not looking at anything else. You tell me your story. And he started telling me his story, which involved the loss of 2 pairs of twin boys, twice, newborns.
That's tragic.
Yeah, and
Gosh.
this man was a very spiritually oriented person. Otherwise, also very, very. He believed in a very simple life, and a very, very principled kind of a fellow. So he started. After that happened, he started believing that there had to be a cosmic reason for what happened to him, because why would his children be taken away from him twice? And there were huge coincidences where the both pairs of twins were born like a couple of days within the first delivery and the second time, and a lot of that happened. So he started believing that, there must be some sort of a cosmic reason for this to happen. And that triggered this very existential kind of a dialogue in his mind, where he started questioning his place in the universe, and he started feeling like very minuscule in this entire his place in the universe, and his existence and all of that. And as he would tell me and he would talk, and he said that, there are times when these questions build up so much pressure in my mind that I end up screaming it out to create that release. And this would happen anywhere. So, if he's in the middle of the street, he has to stop his vehicle and let out a big scream, or he's at home, or any of those things. And that was the reason people started thinking that he's losing his mind, and he started psychiatric treatment.
Wow. His outlet. That was his outlet.
Exactly.
To let, right. Oh gosh. Yes. Please carry on.
So as he was telling me his story, I said, what do I treat him for asking existential questions? Because I think even the ability to ask existential questions does not lie with everyone. It's only at a certain point in life we get where we start to question our place in the universe. And I don't think that's an illness, really. So I said, all right, you know what? We are just going to talk. Every time you visit to the hospital, I will just sit with you and we will talk. And we started having these existential debates and these discussions and back and forth. And while doing that, I started teaching him physical relaxation techniques, where he could allow his mind to wander into these questions without feeling that physiological trigger of something traumatic. Obviously, there was trauma in his past. It was traumatic. So by way of these discussions, we started working on healing his trauma of losing his children in a relaxed muscle body. And gradually we came to a place where he understood that maybe this is my pursuit of life now. He was feeling aimless, directionless before, and he came to this place where he said that, okay, maybe now the pursuit of my life is learning more and more about the universe. And maybe what happened to me with my children was a way for me to question everything so that I could go on this quest. And by the time I left from there, he was at a place where his symptoms had completely disappeared. His screaming had stopped. His medication had reduced. The psychiatrist wasn't entirely convinced to give it up completely. So his dose had been tapered. He was functioning well in his work, and he became very in sync with his pursuit for spirituality and for his existential questions, so that he could still ask those questions and not become worked up by it as if it was something to be kept, something that needed to be kept a lid on. And that really moved me. And I said, oh my God, we don't have to look at everything as an illness. And a couple of months ago, I was watching this webinar with someone, one of the therapists abroad, and he was talking about hope as a very important element in any therapeutic relationship. And I realized that everybody believes in something or the other. You don't have to have a name for it, but everybody needs to have some kind of faith to hold on to in times of distress. And people who pull through do have something to hold on to. So now what I do is, from a spiritual angle, what I do with my clients is that I always ask them in the initial couple of sessions when we are having the intake, that what is it that you have faith in? So it can be a religious thing, it can be a non-religious thing, it can even be a person, or it can be an ability of themselves, anything. But essentially, faith is what brings out your spirituality, is my understanding of it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That's an amazing story. And it's amazing how you generally tend to find that the people who have suffered the most significant losses are almost like tested to question these things quicker than everyone else.
Yeah.
Coming on to my next thing, leading on from that, is, so I was interested to know what 3 events or clients have taught you the most about yourself, and how has this changed or shaped you? And this is for you it's a very personal question, because I seem to find that anybody who, like yourself, works in the field that you do tends to have like a personal tectonic shift before they get onto a platform to realize that it's to help others.
True.
So I mean, the story that you just told us about this man and his kind of questioning process, was that one of those kind of key people or key events that taught you something about yourself? Or have there been three events or three people that you're willing to tell me about? Go for it.
No, I would certainly like to include him in one of the three for sure, because that story never leaves my mind. It always guides me when I'm with a client who I find is struggling with existential crisis or existential pain. I'm always reminded and guided by this story. So he would definitely be that. I think one of the things that really has been a contributor to my professional journey has been my own background. I come from a family where there was a lot of domestic abuse happening and a lot of conflict between my parents, and I'm an only child. So I've spent a lot of my childhood hiding in bathrooms and not knowing what I'm going to find when I come out of there, which prompted me to leave home for education, because that seemed like a very good escape at that point of time. There was nothing else I could do, and I that time used psychology as a very good excuse, because the schools in my city were not offering it at after high school level. So I said that I need to get out because I want to study this subject. So I went, and when I started studying it, I realized that there's nothing else I want to study for the rest of my life. This was 1997, and I'm still studying it. And obviously, it gave me a lot of insight into myself. And I think a lot of us who come into this field do come, like you said, with our own tectonic shifts that lead us here in search of answers. But I think it was also about being able to come from a place of empathy, because you've seen pain very closely, and then you can at least put yourself in your client's shoes. Even if it's not the same experience, pain is pain, right? You know what pain feels like, no matter what the trigger is.
Thank you for sharing that. That can't be easy, especially when you're sharing, a difficult upbringing.
Yeah, but over the years, it's actually become easy, because I've realized that if I'm not going to talk about it, then people who are actually going through it right now will never talk about it. I'm not sure I had to go through that to get to. It's definitely been a huge contributor to me being who I am today, for sure. But I don't think, I think I talked about this with my clients often, that I think the connotation of the word strong has become about how much you have been able to take on. I find that to be a little strange, because strong needs to be something where when adversity comes, you will be able to stand in the face of it. But I think nowadays we use the term strong to be to signify how much you can take on, right? And I think that that's a very toxic positivity kind of a concept, I feel.
Yes.
Right?
Toxic positivity. Yes. I see exactly what you mean. And it does become that way. All of the kind of conditioned baggage that goes with it. Look at how much she's doing. She's doing this or he's doing that. And
Exactly. Like, I see so many women in my practice who are going through abusive relationships, and all they hear from everyone around is, oh, wow, you're so brave for taking this. Be brave. It's okay. Handle. Why does no one talk about setting boundaries? Tell her to set her boundaries. Don't tell her to be strong and bear it.
Spot on. Very true. And that's a really valid, interesting point that gets missed in that storytelling, because the woman becomes brave and courageous for sharing, but then the other stuff gets missed.
Absolutely.
Is there a medical or clinical definition of trauma that is felt by the body, but not in the actual sense of a cut or a wound?
Yes, there are clinical definitions of trauma, but let me explain it to you first in a very simple language. Trauma. So when we think about trauma, when we say trauma, we think of a bad experience, right? But the fact is that not every bad experience becomes traumatic. The only experiences that become traumatic are the ones where two, three elements are present. One, you are caught by surprise. You don't expect it to happen at all. Second, it shakes some basic life belief of yours, like life beliefs, like when you're born, you kind of it intrinsically that my parents are supposed to love me and nurture me and protect me. Or when you grow up, you kind of grow up with this belief that my partner is going to be faithful to me. So these are basic beliefs that we all are, I think, literally, I mean, maybe definitely not born with, but when we literally grow up with them. So anything, they stem from our basic need for safety and security. So people who you attach to them in the most intimate ways, like your parents and your spouse, or your partner, they are the ones that you seek safety and security first, right? So any event that shakes that up becomes traumatic. And the third element is that when you are helpless in the face of it, when you have not been able to do something in that moment to fend off whatever is happening to you.
Sure. Yeah, that makes absolute sense. So moving onwards then, how does trauma, with those three kind of elements considered, how does it then go to impact the mind and the body?
Trauma impacts both mind and the body. There's a wonderful book called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. He's like the god of trauma therapy in the entire world. This book is, I think, mandatory for everyone who might have experienced anything traumatic in their life. It talks about how trauma gets stored in our bodies. And I find it to be absolutely true. So what happens when something traumatic is happening to you? It triggers a immediate survival mode in our brains, which involves or which makes the brain respond in a, you might have heard of the fight or flight response. So it makes the brain responds in a fight or flight manner where it realizes that there is a threat. Now the brain doesn't have eyes of its own, so it doesn't know that there isn't a real threat to your life. So for the brain, everything is a threat to life, right? You're going to die. That's what the signal is. But the psychological threats that we experience may not necessarily end up in us dying physically, but that's what the brain registers. So it activates in the same way. It sends out these chemical cocktails into our bloodstream, because it thinks that either you need to fight your assailant or you need to run from there. Now researchers have found two more responses to add to fight and flight, which are fawn and freeze. So when you're threatened or when you're triggered by a trauma response, you may also end up, and this is seen a lot in children of abusive parents or alcoholic parents, where you try and fawn over the people around you so that you can please them and make sure that nothing gets upset. And the freeze response is where you just become numb, absolutely frozen. You cannot move, you cannot act, you cannot think.
Previous podcast I heard you mention something called cognitive dissonance. Can you explain that a little bit more?
So cognitive dissonance is basically a state of being where you believe something else, but you're having to do something opposite of that. So let's say I'm a very principled, honest kind of a person, and I get a job at a place where everybody is very shady, and there are a lot of underhanded things going on, and I have to get involved in a lot of politics to be successful. So while I may be able to do it, I'm not in sync with who I am inside. So this is essentially what cognitive dissonance is all about.
So there is a scientific or clinical term that actually applies to kind of your being true to your core essence in
Correct.
Almost like everyday life.
That's correct.
One other question, actually two other questions, I think. But so going back to trauma, in your opinion, how is trauma understood? And is it something that is understood in society?
We are always taught to run away from uncomfortable emotions, because emotions, especially the uncomfortable ones, are seen as something to fix. So you always want to do something about it the moment you start feeling uncomfortable. The happy ones are okay, they are accepted. But the moment something uncomfortable comes up, oh my God, something needs to be done. You've got to get away from this. So it's this tendency that when people are confronted with something painful, they want to get away from it because they don't know what it is like to be in that situation, and two, they want to fix it immediately. So, and it's almost become a natural instinct to want to fix everyone's pain if the moment somebody comes and confides in you. Nobody I mean, unless you're a therapist, nobody wants to provide a listening space, right? Like, you don't have to do anything. You just have to sit there and be the vessel for this person, to just pour their heart out. That's it. So that's what it is. And because you want to fix it, you then come up with, oh, okay, forget about it. It's fine. In 5 days, you won't even remember this. Or, oh, let's go out for a movie and, eat something nice. It's going to make you feel better. Or it's the other end of the spectrum that, suddenly people will become it'll become some issue for activism immediately, right? Immediately there would be so much displaced anger expressed that the actual victim's voice gets buried, and then it becomes a huge issue. It should be an issue, of course, but in that moment when the person is expressing their pain, they need validation.
Yes. Two absolutely critical points. One is the listening space, and it's so underutilized. And it's so undervalued. And I think also, I don't think we understand the value of listening, or the fact that listening is a skill that is so important that we're not taught. We're taught how to speak. We're taught how to, do, speaking, the physical things, but we are actually not taught how to listen. And
absolutely. Don't listen to our kids. I mean, and our parents didn't listen to us. Listen, and when they say listen, there's a difference between reaction and response, right? Most of the times when a child is talking to the parent, and this is true for all generations, the moment the child comes crying from school and you ask the child what happened, before you've even put the question mark after the what happened, you're already thinking that what is going to come out of his mouth and what solution am I going to provide here?
So you're thinking 5 steps ahead already, right? How can I fix this?
How can I fix this? Because I think, and this is where the conditioning begins of wanting to run away from uncomfortable emotions, because you, as a parent, feel very, very responsible that, okay, if my child has a problem, if my child has tears in his or her eyes, I should be able to do something about it. But you're also human. There may be times where you really cannot do anything about it, or there may be times where you might need to teach the child to fight his or her own battles. But before you can do that, before you can figure out what is the best approach in this situation, you have to listen.
Definitely. Which kind of takes me on to my last question, which is, if we're looking specifically at listening and parenting, is that why there is a lot of, or the lack of listening and the constant fix-it need? Is that why there's a lot of toxic positivity? Now, when I say that, I mean, the whole helicopter parenting, the whole tell your child that, kind of almost brush over their emotions and try and fix it with that cake that's going to make them feel better and forget about that horrible situation. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Because when I look at my kids, I kind of, if I am going to take that time out to spend with them, I want to listen to them, and I want them to feel their feelings, because their feelings are theirs and they're real.
Yeah.
However, I can see other people who kind of go to the extent of, I made this for you to make you feel better, kind of taking away the fact that the child should have their own tools and capabilities to be able to navigate some of those feelings and how to express those themselves.
Wonderful.
And that's what I kind of term toxic positivity.
Right.
How does that kind of work or make sense in any way?
I loved what you said just now, absolutely. Any parent's job is you don't own the child, right? You are there to raise the child.
Spot on. If I could high five with you right now, I would. I'm virtually high fiving you, Prachi. Yes, on there.
Right. And I think somewhere we forget that at times, we just forget it. We think that the whole molding and shaping the child is taken in the wrong way, right? Like, you don't get to paint the face on the doll. The doll is already there. So you just need to, all you have to do, and I think if every parent would just imbibe this, it would become so much better for everyone out there, that all you have to do is understand at every stage of parenting, who is my child? and what can I do to facilitate that he or she blossoms into the best version of who he or she is, rather than thinking, what do I want to make my child?
Yes, very true. So it's almost like I was talking to my husband about this the other day, and I kind of said, sometimes I feel like I was raised by broken children who became broken adults, who raised broken children who became a broken adult. And it's that cycle, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's a cycle. The whole intergenerational thing that you were talking about, this is exactly it. Because we're so hell-bent on projecting our own unfulfilled desires and dreams on our children, that we end up passing our pain, our past traumas, and our defense mechanisms from those traumas also to our children.
Brilliant. Thank you. I think I'm done with my questions.
Okay.
Do you have anything else? Oh, right. There is that one last question, but I think I would love to come back and talk to you again.
Okay.
On a separate topic, because I think we've got enough for this one. How does that fit? Yeah, no, this is great, because I'd love to come back and talk to you about, the whole, do you believe we carry stresses and memories from our previous life? I think that itself would be a whole different interesting conversation to have outside of this.
There are so many dimensions we can bring into that, I think.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much. That was so good. I really, really enjoyed listening to you, and I love the fact that you're a storyteller. It just makes it amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Eternal Paradigm. Join me next time.